Hello, I'm Alex, and welcome to Learning SQL Syntax and Fundamentals from Scratch. This course is for very basic beginners. It's not for people who have any experience with SQL or relational databases or relational database management systems. I am not a pro at this. I use this in my everyday life, and with my profession as a developer, as a software engineer. So I am not the greatest software engineer in the world, and I am not the worst software engineer in the world. So that's always my caveat. If you ever see any of my other videos. So let's get started. Some of the things that we're going to learn today is what is a relational database. What does it do? What's it for? What do you need them for? What is an RDBMS? Or Relational Database Management System. What is SQL? Who uses SQL, and why should I learn SQL? So let me give this caveat to myself. I have always been a front-end server developer guy. And when I say server, back-end server developer guy, I'm talking C#, VB.NET, stuff like that, COBOL. Never have ever been a SQL database guy, right? I know just enough I've known just enough in the past to make myself dangerous, do basic stuff in SQL, create, write, read, update, delete records. But the more advanced query language stuff, I've always wanted to learn, because I've been in larger companies where there's always been a separation of duties. And the company that I work for now, it's a much smaller company, and you have to be more full stack. Full stack meaning that you have to be able to take the process from beginning to end. And so there's still a separation of duties there. However, on the development side, we use a lot of test data, and we hit up against different SQL databases that we test our front-end code against. And so I've had to learn more SQL than I've been exposed to in the past, and I love it. And I've always wanted to do it, but I just have never had the opportunity to do so. And now that I have, I want to share that knowledge with everyone else. So let's get started with the first is, what is a relational database? Well, a relational database is basically storage of information that's located on a computer. Relational databases are a simplified way to store data for easier organization. So relational databases help you organize your data. It helps you to organize it. It helps you to query it. It helps you to report on it in a much easier way. Relational databases allow for easy identification and access to data in relation to other pieces of data inside of the same database. That's it. It's kind of a mouthful, but once we get to the illustration on the next slide, you'll understand what I'm talking about with that. But in a nutshell, what that means is, inside of a relational database, you've got other pieces of data that are stored in relation to the piece of data you're looking at. So it's real easy to tie them together and get all of the information that you need. And finally, the data inside of most relational databases are stored in containers called tables. I call them containers. Somebody could say RAR, whatever the case may be. But let's kind of get an idea of the structure of a simple relational database or database. Tomato, right? So the first that you want to look at, obviously, you have your server, which is going to be your overall computer system. Then inside of that server, you're going to have your relational database, right? And this is, the highest level in a database structure that you're going to have. Inside of that database, you're going to have tables. So here I have an example of a table called customers. And inside of this table, you have your data. Now, data inside of a table is stored in column and rows. So if you've ever used Excel spreadsheets or anything like that, you've got your column at the top with the header, and you've got your row information that goes from left to right. And your column contains data, and rows are individual collections of records, right? So in this particular relational database, we have a customers table, which has a customer ID, an address ID, a name, and a phone number. We've got another one called addresses, and it's got address ID, it's got an order ID, it's got address information in there, and you'll notice that there's an address ID here and there's something here, right? And that's a key that can link these two tables together. And then finally, we've got an orders table, and in there we've got an order ID, a product, a SKU, and an order date. And because this is a relational database, and I can grab information from all three of these tables into one view or one query, they all match. So for example, the address ID, I can query off of that and get information from both of these tables if I write my SQL the right way. And then over here, I can grab information from all three of these, right? These would be like a join or something like that. So how are relational databases managed? Well, relational databases are managed and leveraged using relational database management systems, or RDBMSs. And a few of the more widely known relational database management systems are Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle DB, and MySQL. I am more of a Microsoft guy. All the Oracle people out there and MySQL people are cringing right now. But the beauty of using relational database and the language, the query language that we're going to learn, it allows you to be able to utilize the same query in multiple management systems with some slight syntax differences, right? But again, I'm going to use Microsoft SQL Server. It's fairly easy to use. It's fairly easy to set up, all right? And again, how do you get to the information in a relational database? Well, you use the RDBMS software, and that software communicates with a relational database using a language called SQL. SQL, or Structured Query Language, is the standard language. It's a standard, ANSI, I think, to communicate with relational databases. And again, like I said just a second ago, it makes it easy for you to learn different platforms, as they all use SQL in some form. In the majority of them, the same SQL statement that you would use in Microsoft SQL Server is going to be the same kind of a SQL statement that you're going to use in Oracle or MySQL, again, with some slight differences based on the platform. You have some keyword differences, right? And so you're going to have some keyword differences there and some slight differences based on the platform that you're using. So I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up MySQL Studio, MySQL Server Management Studio, and we're going to import a database, and we're going to learn a little bit of SQL in the next few videos. So I'm going to pause this, and we'll do that. Okay, so the first thing you have to do to run any kind of an SQL server or relational database management studio or management system is you have to have a SQL Server. Here is, and I'll put the link in the description of this video. Here is a link to SQL Server 2017 Express. It's free. You can download it, and obviously there's a few limitations, but if you're using 10 gigs of data in your database for free, then you are definitely doing some heavy lifting. So for this particular tutorial, we're going to use the Microsoft set of products. We're going to use SQL Server 2017 Express, and we're also going to use SQL Server Management Studio. So to get to SQL Server Management Studio, we're going to go there, and I'm using an Explorer just because I don't usually use it, but SQL Server Management Studio, and here's the link to that, and I will put this also in the description of the video. So basically, you're going to first download the SQL Server. You have to make sure you have enough, server space, space on your computer to run it. We're going to download the Management Studio that allows you to query and to set up your database. And then lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to download from GitHub. We're going to download a copy of, I didn't get it all there. We're going to download a copy of the pubs database, instapubs database. And so what this is, it's a free database of sample data from Microsoft. And all of this, you'll see, it'll look like, you know, a bunch of crazy stuff in there if you're not exposed to it. But so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to download this. And I've already downloaded, obviously, my copy of SQL Server Express, and it's running. SQL Server Express runs as a service. It'll start as soon as your computer starts up. It has to be running for you to be able to do what you need to do. So as you'll see here, here's my SQL Server instance right there, and it says stop, but I know it's running. It's actually running, so. And that's actually the agent, that's not the SQL Server. So that's over here. Well, that's my SSMS. So in the background, as a service, my SQL Server is running. So once you download the SQL Server Express, get it installed, and then install SQL Server Management Studio. And then you'll see it'll look like this. So SQL Server Management Studio is just it's also something that's free of charge. It gives you the ability to, you know, look into your database, insert rows, insert records, insert tables, delete tables, update tables, all that kind of stuff. The acronym for the basic operations of using a relational database or table or records in a relational database is CRUD. CRUD, C-R-U-D. And we call that create, read, update, and delete. They're just basic permissions that everyone should or should not have, right? And we'll get into that a little bit later. So right now, once you've gone ahead and you've downloaded all of the software that you need, what we want you to do is go to the link in the description to the GitHub account, and I'm going to go ahead, and I've got it pulled up over here. So there's multiple ways that you can get this information into your SQL Server. I've gone ahead, you can save this as a SQL Server script and then run the script. Since I'm just lazy, I'm just gonna copy and paste it because it's in the text format. So you come over to your Management Studio, and then what you'll need to do is, let me disconnect from this. What you'll need to do is you'll need to connect to your instance of your SQL Server, and it'll use your Windows authentication depending on how you have it set up. So I'm going to go ahead and connect, and I'm already connected over here, so it'll show you that you're connected. Now if you come down here to databases, you don't have any databases other than the regular system databases. Do not mess with these system databases. Leave them alone. They're for more advanced use. Okay. And then there's other folders here. You'll see a security, folder here, logins. You'll see, different logins and stuff like that. This SA is for, your SQL admin account. It's X'd out because I don't have it. I don't have SQL authentication set up right now. I have Windows authentication set up. And then you've got different roles in there. So each role gives an individual different rights. So for example, let's say a DB creator can create databases, whereas a public can only read information from a database. Credentials, there's nothing in that one. That's for more advanced use for DBAs. Those DBAs and database administrator. I am not a DBA. There's server objects, there's replication, and there's management. So these, you want to just ignore those for now. Ignore all that for now, right? We're going to concentrate on this folder right here for databases. To create our Instapubs database, what we're going to do is we're going to click New Query, and it's going to launch a blank screen like this, and it's connected to our SQL Express server right here. I'm going to just paste in the SQL to do the Instapubs database creation. And then I'm just going to say execute. And you'll see a bunch of stuff here. And down here, if you see green there that says query executed successfully, then you're good to go. Come over here to databases and click this little refresh button, or just hit F5. And now you've got a pubs database, complete with information in there. So database diagrams, again, that's not something that I used in the past because, again, I'm not a DBA, so I've never had a need to. As I learn what that is, and maybe I'll shoot a video out there about it. Views is different. Views gives individuals read access into your table. So you can say, let's say we say select 2 on this, and this gives us a view into this particular table, this particular database, right? What that does, it gives you the ability to allow individuals to only look at the data, but they can't change the data, right? And then you can also customize your view as well. Synonyms, again, that's not something I've used. Programmability, let me say it that way. I've used this in the past for store procedures. So store procedures are basically, as we go through, you'll find that your SQL queries can get extremely large at times. And what a store proc does, or store procedure does, it allows you to create functionality that you can call one line of SQL and do a very large SQL statement in the background. And in a future video, we'll get into how store procs work, and maybe we'll build a couple. But for right now, we're going to look at this tables folder. Okay, so I'm going to close that, and I'm going to close that. I won't save that. And I'm going to expand the view, the tree over here, and we see in here we've got some tables. So our create table functionality, or our create table query, was done in SQL. I'll come back up here. So all of this is SQL. And this is the language that we're going to learn how to use. Now, we may not have to do all of this. So like a create table, we'll go through how tables are created, and we'll put some constraints on them for primary keys and maybe some foreign key constraints, just to learn how to do that kind of stuff. But what we'll do more of is we'll do the create, read, update, create, select, update, and delete functionality at the table level, right? So here we see some inserts here. We're putting information into this author's table over here using this statement here. Okay. Down here is another insert into a different table, and a bunch of inserts here. So you have to create the tables first, and then you have to insert the data into the table. So that's all this was doing over here. So we've got about a few more minutes here, then I'll cut this video and we'll make another one. So what we've done thus far is we've created a database, created a server instance, created a database, and we've imported table information into our database. So how are we going to read this information? How are we going to read this information? Well, the way you read the information is using SQL, or SQL, right? And so I've got, let me open that file back up over here. I've got some information in a file over here that I've just been kind of going over. And we're going to go through how some of this SQL works. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new query over here. And then I'm going to close that. And then I'll open it up in another window here with Notepad over there. There we go. So again, I'm not a SQL guy by trade. I'm a dev guy. And so I've always known folks, or I've always been in the position that I have to give that information to other people because of the separation of data or separation of duties. In large companies, it is very rare, unless you're full stack, to have an individual who can do all of the front end development and then have access to the data in the background. And that's because of SOX regulation, Sarbanes-Oxley law, the Enron deal put that into place. So there's always been, for me, a separation of duties. But that doesn't mean that I don't know any SQL. So what we're going to do is, again, we've gone ahead and we've grabbed the link to this pubs, and we've imported this, we've created this pubs database and all the tables that are in it. So we're just going to go ahead and do a very simple query. So the second concept we're going to learn rather quickly here is there are different query types. What is a query type? Well, a query type is just a way to get your information out of your tables. And the most well-known query types in SQL are inserts, selects, updates, and deletes. You're going to use a select statement almost every single time, right? It's probably the most widely used query type. And all the query type does is it just serves different functionality. Again, they correspond with CRUD operations. There's a number of select statements that you or query types that you can use. So we'll go through some of these. So the first one we're going to use is the regular good old select statement, right? And to use a select statement, what you have to do first is you have to well, you know what, let's bypass that. We're going to do inserts first, okay? So inserts follow a specific syntax because you can't do anything else without having data in your table, right? If I created a table over here and didn't have any data in it, I'm not going to be able to do anything. So this inserts represent the C in our CRUD, right? Create. And inserts follow a specific syntax. You have a keyword called insert, and that tells SQL that you're going to be putting records into something, okay? You have the into statement, and what that does, it says, hey, SQL, I'm going to be inserting something into somewhere. Now what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to give it a table name. So over here, we see names of our tables, okay? Now, if I want to use a specific database and I don't have, one of the things that, that you have in SQL Server Management Studio, if you're connected to a server, you can insert data into any of these databases, but you'll find that if you don't have a table that corresponds with what you're trying to look at, you'll get an error. So you have to make sure up in this drop down that you have your right table selected. Or the easy way to do that is to just say, I want to use pubs. Now, the cool thing about using SQL Server Management Studio is it has this Intellisense functionality in there. So when I start typing pubs, or if I type a space here, use, if I type a bracket there, in SQL Server Management Studio, it gives you a look ahead to the ones that you have available to you. This comes in handy. but you should always know where you're going to be inserting data into anyway. So I'm going to use pubs. And it is case sensitive. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to insert into a table in the pubs. Now, before you insert data into your table, you really ought to know what the table looks like. Okay. So I'm going to insert data into our authors table. And to find out how that table looks, I can come over here and click on the tree next to authors, and I can get the columns over here. And it tells me what columns are in this table, and inside of this table, what columns have to have data in them. So we'll get into what that means a little later. But right now, just know that this ID, this name, last name, first name, and this phone number and this contract, they have to have data in all of those fields. Everything else you don't have to have data. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert data into this authors table. So we can say authors. You don't have to put the DBO in front of it. If I put DBO in front of it, it'll just pull up with authors. So a shortcut is just to put the name of the table. Okay. Now, what I need to do is I need to reference my column names. And to do that, I'm going and there's a specific syntax for this. To do that, you have to have your column names defined in your insert. So let's say I'm only going to insert data into the ID, first name, last name, phone, and contract. So I've got the 5 columns here. All I've got to do is in here, type in the column name, AU, and you see it pops up, AUID. And always try to make sure you put them in the correct order that you see over here. It's just, it makes life a lot easier for you. And instead of that, I'll put AU last name, AU first name, phone, and contract. Okay. Now I've got to put the information that I'm going to put in those actual columns. Okay. So for that, I need to put a keyword called values. That tells SQL Server I'm going to put information into the authors table in columns ID, last name, first name, phone, and contract. And the values that I'm going to put in there are, and then the other part of when you're putting information into these tables, the type of data that you're putting in there must match the container that you're putting the information into. It must match the container. You can't put square pegs around holes. So for example, this contract, it says it's a bit, so it's got to be a 1 or a 0, right? Binary bits, bytes, that kind of stuff. Phone number can be a 12-byte character. If I try to put 13 bytes in it, it's not going to like it, right? First name, last name, and this ID has to be 11 bytes. I can only put 40 bytes in this last name and 20 bytes in this first name. And like I talked about the phone there, right? And we'll get into data types a little later in SQL. But for right now, let's put an ID in there. And so like I like to do, for character data, you wanted to put single quotes in there. For numeric or for non-character data, like dates and that kind of stuff, dates you have to put you can put single quotes in. But for like this bit there, I'm going to put in the data with a 1 or a 0 without the semicolons. All right. 3, 4, and then there's a 0. So what I'm going to do, if I try to do this insert right now, I'm going to get something that's going to look funny. So it says, hey, the insert statement conflicted with check constraint statement, it says that the conflict occurred in pubs table authors column author ID. So that means it says, hey, you cannot put nothing into that. You gotta have something in there. So let's do this. Let's do something that looks like this. Knowing that database, I know it's it looks kind of like a social, but it's not a social. But I'll just put something in there like looks like that. So 4 5 1 3 4 1 2 3 4, right? And then the next, so that's going to go into the ID field. Last name, you know, I'm going to put, let's go ahead and fill out the entire insert here. I've got one that we can use. Okay. I'm a big Game of Thrones fan. If you look at the other video, I've even got, you know, I'm talking about C# inheritance and that kind of stuff. And I use the Lannister family. I'm going to use, since this is the table of authors, I'm going to use one George R.R. Martin. So let's just do 514-06-8189 for George R.R. Martin. So we're going to put Martin, George R.R. His phone number is going to be 712-574-1254. And his address, we're going to put him in Flea Bottom Road. 1124 Flea Bottom Road. You're going to have a bowl of the brown. Crown Lands. Because anybody that watched this show or watched the show knows that Flea Bottom's in King's Landing. Yes. That's Westeros, for those that are asking. 10010. And I'll put a 0 there. And you'll note that I had a little squiggly line there. Let me go back to it. It had a little squiggly line there. See a little squiggly line? If I hover over the squiggly line, it says, hey, you got an incorrect SQL statement. So I'll go ahead and put that there. So now, if I execute this query, now you can execute a query one or two ways. You can just hit F5, you can hit execute, and then if you got a ton of SQL on a page, but you only want to use this one SQL statement, you can highlight the SQL like this and then hit execute, and that'll just execute what you have highlighted. So now I click it and it says one row is affected. So now I've got one row of data in there that has George R.R. Martin in there. And to be able to read that record, and we'll cover this next in the next video because I'm getting up on the time here. We're going to do a select statement. Select star from authors. I'll just run this one. So if we scroll down, we're looking up. There he is, line 11. There's George R.R. Martin. And this information was successfully inserted into our table. And so the next thing we're going to look at in the next video is our select statement. And that's how you read records from a database. So we've learned how to install our SQL Server. We've imported or created a database and created tables for that database with data, test data in them. Next thing we're going to learn is how to do some SQL select statements. And again, that is something that you're going to use quite a bit. So until next time, until next video, here's looking at you, and have a blessed one, and deuces.